Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the Ayn Rand Center's Daily Collective. Yes, that's right, folks. It's daily now, a daily collective of fun, crazy, intelligent people that have stuff to talk about. My name's Jacqueline Schumann. I am joined here by my partners in crime, Nicholas. I'm just giving first names today. So we've got Nicholas, we've got Matthew, and we've got Megan, right? Am I saying your name right? All right. You never know. You never know how things are spelled differently. I could be Jaqueline.
I'll respond to pretty much anything that isn't an expletive.
I'll respond to expletives. So there we go. Just not Jackie. That's all that I ask. But all right, folks, today we've got a few interesting topics. The first one that we are going to start with today is, what do we all think of conservative objectivists, air quotes? These are people that are in the conservative movement who have been influenced by Ayn Rand. They sort of claim Ayn Rand as their inspiration, their heroes. I believe Donald Trump might be an example of this. Mark Cuban also was an example of this, although he's kind of switched sides recently. But they kind of move away from Rand, as did Mark Cuban. I guess Charlie Kirk is an example of this, who moved away from, who was strongly allied with Yaron Brook, and I think we're going to be speaking of that a little bit more, I hope, if other people know about this. I'm not as familiar with this topic, although I'm happy to riff on anything. Are these people positive? Are these conservatives, conservative objectivists, are they doing harm? Are they doing good? Are they a good influence in culture? Do they help the cause of objectivism? And what is it? Why do they distance themselves from Ayn Rand at some point? I have my theories on it, but I would like to hear yours first. So I'm going to kick it off to the group, see what you guys think.
Okay, I have a few thoughts. There have been a few periods in the past, say, 2 decades where a lot of conservatives have started quoting Rand, quoting slogans from her works, from her philosophy. One was, of course, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and particularly with the rise of the whole Tea Party movement and the connection with Obamacare, which was such a contentious subject during that period around 2010. There you had certain conservatives like Rand Paul Ryan, Ted Cruz, quoting from Rand at length. To be clear, I don't actually consider any of these conservatives to be objectivists in any meaningful sense. It seems to me that they were just quoting from Rand, spouting objectivist slogan because of a certain cultural cachet that Rand's ideas have with a certain segment of the demographics that they were targeting. I don't think that any of these people have ever seriously engaged with Rand's ideas, really understood her ideas in any deep, meaningful sort of way. And as soon as their own premises, which generally tend to be of a Christian religious nature, as soon as their own premises start clashing with objectivist ideas, particularly, of course, the importance of reason, and of which atheism is a consequence, then they start gradually distancing themselves. Paul Ryan is a very good example. There was one interview where he was quoted as saying that Ayn Rand was one of his all-time heroes. And then just a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years after that, he starts distancing himself and saying, no, that was taken out of context. I really don't quite mean it that way. We see this again and again. These are politicians, which means they don't have convictions. They don't have principles. They are pragmatists by nature. And so if it suits them in the moment to quote from Rand, to quote from Galt's speech in Atlas Shrugged, they'll do it. But then as soon as it clashes with their other non-principles and non-convictions, then they move in a completely different direction. And we see this again and again.
I have a question. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew. Please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm from the United Kingdom, so I'm maybe slightly removed from all this. But from what I've seen of them, I think Nicholas is absolutely correct that they just seem to take certain elements. I don't want to say necessarily sound bites, but they take these particular elements of objectivism that they think are going to sort of support their position at the particular point in time, but that they don't in any way embrace the overall philosophy. Indeed, as far as I understand it, Paul Ryan and Ted Cruz are both committed Christians, which obviously is completely at odds with objectivism.
I would be a little bit less charitable than you, Matthew, and say that they really are just using Ayn Rand for the purpose of sound bites. And by the way, I'm coming. And by the way, I'm a little bit removed from this as well, like you, Matthew, because I'm coming at this from Canada. So I'm seeing it from a slightly. And believe me, no politician in Canada would ever quote Ayn Rand or associate himself with objectivism in any way. Canadian politics is
I was
so
actually going
completely
to ask that,
slanted.
Matthew. Does that phenomenon? You're in the UK. Does that phenomenon exist in the UK?
Not really. I mean, the only guy I can think of, and some of the regular UK guys are going to laugh as I say this, there's a guy called Sajid Javid, who's a Conservative Party politician over here, who reportedly reads Howard Rourke's courtroom speech from the Fountainhead twice a year because he finds it so inspirational. For a while, there was this thing that whenever Sajid Javid said anything, you'd get all this coverage in the press about the Ayn Rand influence, but he doesn't describe himself as an objectivist, and he really isn't an objectivist, I don't think.
Fair enough. Okay, so 2 follow-up questions. One for the audience. If you haven't smashed the like button and the subscribe button and hit us with the super chats, why haven't you done so? I'm worried that Daniel is subsisting off of top ramen and American beer, and we can't have that. Second question. Jax, you're muted. Were you going to say something? You're still muted.
Okay, how about now? Am I better now?
Perfect. You're
Okay.
perfect
My
now.
joke is falling flat, much like the Bud Light that Daniel drinks. So that was it.
Burn. So my
Well,
second
let me
question
say,
is,
Clary, it's the evening here. I have got my favourite cocktail in my hand. I hope nobody minds.
it's not American beer of any kind, is it?
It's not American beer now.
Okay, good, because we might have to eject you from the movement. I do not have that authority, and I would not exercise it if I did. So my second question is, when we say help or harm the movement, to be honest, I'm not sure what that looks like. When I think about what I hope objectivism, how it impacts the culture going forward. I have a beautiful 7-year-old daughter. I have only a vague idea of what I'm hoping for. So maybe you guys can kind of provide a visual of what it would look like for a politician who espouses objectivism in any way, what it would look like for them to help the culture, help the movement, or impede either of those.
Okay, so
I think
a few
it would.
thoughts. When you have these conservative politicians quoting Rand out of context or using her slogans just for the purpose of its cultural cachet, ultimately, I think it's inconsequential, or at least on balance. There is a certain sense in which I think it can be harmful and in which it can be helpful. To take the positive first, when one of these politicians quotes from John Galt's speech or some of Rand's other writings, those more intellectually active people in the audience watching the news or hearing this quote might hear one of these quotes and might be intrigued, might be motivated to explore the ideas further. They may think, oh, that actually makes sense. I should look into this writer's ideas, check out some of her books. So that's one sense in which somebody quoting Rand can have a positive influence on the culture. It just gets her name out there, and it contributes to her reputation. Now, I actually have had conversations with leftists who very often will point to these particular cases as a way of denouncing Rand. They'll say, oh, well, Rand, she's one of these people who's spouted forth by people like Ted Cruz and Paul Ryan, and the suggestion being here that her ideas are superficial and that she's on the conservative right. And so people will actually use this as an excuse for dismissing Rand. Why I say that's ultimately inconsequential is I think these particular people are individuals who would not be persuaded by Rand in any case. They wouldn't take her ideas seriously. They wouldn't really actually look at what she really had to say in any first-handed sort of way. So like the famous quote from Rand herself, quoting from the Kipling poem where she said, "It is not fools I seek to address." If fools take her words out of context and spin them in one particular direction, ultimately, who cares? What we're really trying to do is reach the most active, the most rational minds out there. And as long as her name is part of the public discourse, then I think that can ultimately help our cause.
And what does that look like? Help, well, not helping the cause, but having the cause succeed.
Ultimately, what that means is getting Rand's books into people's hands. People actually taking enough of an interest in her ideas, in her perspective, and what she had to say, that they will actually pick up one of her books, start reading, and then eventually take it from there. Maybe they'll start watching Yaron Brook's show. Maybe they'll start taking courses at Ayn Rand University, or engaging with the movement in some other ways.
In this episode right here, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they'll start watching some of the shows on this channel, engaging with the discussions. That's what we really want. And for people in whatever way, large or small, to start taking the ideas seriously and understanding them more deeply.
I think I would want to see, I mean, if you're asking what it looks like for a politician to really espouse the ideas, or what that looks like for the movement, I would want to see them more principled. And I would want to see them actually implementing the ideas of Ayn Rand, implementing reason in their policy, understanding that they need to regulate far less and allow free markets far more. I would want to see them actually voting according to reason, because I don't see that in any of the politicians. I think I had some hope, and I don't know that I ever really had hope in Ted Cruz. I did have some hope in what's his name, Rand Paul, but every single one of these politicians has let me down with various colors of unreason. And I would love to see them, like Nicholas was saying, taking the ideas more seriously. But I do think that I actually think so. I'll give my answer of why I don't think that what's going on with the conservatives kind of glomming on to Ayn Rand and then giving her. I don't think they get it. I really don't think that they get it. And then when they do get it, it scares them. The atheism part scares them. The lack of government scares them. And they kind of run like, oh no, they superficially love the idea of a Howard Rourke or a John Galt even. I think more Howard Rourke. I think a lot of them more like to identify with Howard Rourke. But then when they actually see sort of the progression, what her ideas mean, and then when they learn that she's an atheist, I think they go running for the hills, or they pull a Ben Shapiro and a Daily Wire and they buy up the rights for Ayn Rand, and they're going to turn it into something insanely crazy. But that's my that's my view on it. We do have some super chats. Megan has been very influential and persuasive in bringing the super chatters out. Let me read a couple of those. Oh no, I can't. There was one that I can't read because it was right at the beginning, and I hope maybe Daniel can Maybe Daniel can put that in the chat for me. Oh, we lost Megan's video. Did we lose Will? No, I think now Megan's back somewhere. Okay.
Sorry, I don't know why I dropped. Hopefully that will not happen again. Although I can't see you. Oh, you're coming back. That's fantastic.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let me start with Robert Nazier for $2. I'm still in my Ayn Rand phase. Yes, Robert. And we hope that you never ever end your Ayn Rand phase, because you do great things for this channel. And Mary-Aline for $3 is sending us a fist bump and support. Thank you, Mary-Aline. Jonathan Honig, great to see you on the channel, Jonathan, for 99 cents, sending us hearts. Adherent of Lady Columbia says, I'm wondering if we should take a page out of one of the actually good libertarian tactics and maybe do what they're doing in New Hampshire with the Free State Project and subsume local community boards. I am unfamiliar with this. Is anybody familiar with this?
This was an idea that emerged some years ago, that a whole bunch of libertarians decided that they were going to move to New Hampshire and start, because it's a relatively small state, that they would start influencing the voting in the direction of more free market libertarian principles, which, I don't know, maybe if we get enough objectivists in Austin, Texas, we might see something like that some years down the road. I don't know. But that's what I was referring to.
Okay, all righty, interesting.
By the way, Jackson, there's something you said earlier that I thought was really quite insightful, that getting better acquainted, like really seriously acquainted with objectivism, would make politicians more principled. It would make them more consistent in their message and in their conviction. Just to take one example. So here in Canada, there is one politician who, to be sure, he's a mixed bag. There's good and bad in him. But he has some good ideas that I think if he understood philosophy, he'd be much more effective. And that's Maxime Bernier. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's the leader of the People's Party of Canada, which it's probably the only really right of center party in Canada. He's got some good ideas. For one thing, he's publicly ridiculed Greta Thunberg, which, okay, maybe not the best way of getting her ideas out there, but at least it shows that he doesn't buy into all the climate change nonsense. And during the whole period of the lockdowns and the mask mandates, he was one of the few vocal opponents of what was going on. During the Freedom Convoy, he was probably the only politician in Canada who vocally supported the truck drivers. And so I have to say hats off to him for that. I give him complete respect for that. And unfortunately, he's also taken some negative views. He's taking some pages out of Ron DeSantis's book in terms of attacking, trying to get gay and trans books out of schools and trying to be a little bit repressive in that respect. So he's a mixture of good ideas and bad ideas. But I think if he understood philosophy, maybe if somebody were to put an Ayn Rand book in his hand, he might actually be much more effective in what he's trying to do.
Interesting, very interesting. And as Mary-Aline says, for $2, live free or die, the New Hampshire state slogan. Yes, that's a good one. All right, folks, any other comments on this topic, or shall we move on to the next one?
We can move on.
All right, so this is the Kevin Spacey one, right? Am I up to date? Am I up to speed on this? So just a few days ago, I believe Kevin Spacey was found not guilty of numerous charges of sexual assault in a British court, in a UK court, which I have a question about, but I will finish reading out the topic. Years after years of accusations and his career completely turning non-existent, he was absolutely canceled. It all happened during the Me Too movement. He hasn't worked in 6 years. There were a number of people that have defended him, but mostly condemned him in public. If you guys remember, his last notable role was in House of Cards, playing a hideously corrupt politician who loved to break the fourth wall and admit it. And in fact, in his first scene of that show, There's a writer expression calling saving the cat. There's actually a book made after it, which is you need to make your protagonist empathetic and likable. And the first thing that Kevin Spacey did was kill a dog, which I thought was hilarious and perfect. But now, does this give us the fact that he was found not guilty? Does this give us the grounds to say he's innocent? Difference between not guilty and innocent. Should he regain his lost career and his reputation? What do we think about how he was sort of convicted in the eye of the public without actually ever being convicted? What do you guys thoughts?
First of all, this most recent court case, which was, I think, decided just in the past couple of days, was just one of many. He was also charged in some cases in America as well. And I think in all of those, he was found not guilty or the case was dismissed. So this is only the latest example of what seems to be a trend. I imagine the problem here is that it's very difficult to prove a case when something has happened years ago, or in some cases when something happened decades ago. It's very difficult to have evidence to prove something like this. But Matthew, because of your legal background, can you tell us a little bit, fill us a little bit more about what's been happening with these court cases against Spacey?
Sure. So for the people that don't know, I am actually a lawyer over here in England, and I actually mainly do deal with criminal defence work.
You call yourself a lawyer or a solicitor?
I'm sorry?
Do you call yourself a lawyer or a solicitor, or is that an old-fashioned term?
Oh, this is a little bit complicated. So traditionally, the split was between solicitors and barristers. And barristers would be traditionally the guys with the wigs and gowns who would go into court, and solicitors would be slightly more in the background. And all of that changed in the early 1990s when it became possible for solicitors to gain what we call higher rights of audience and be able to do what used to be the barrister's work as well. So I originally qualified as a solicitor and subsequently did do the additional advocacy qualifications. So I now do quite often go off with my wig and gown into the higher courts.
Oh, lovely. I hope you wear it one day for the show.
But to explain the Spacey case, Kevin Spacey, a few years ago, I think at the same time as he was doing House of Cards in America, was creative director of the Old Vic Theatre in London. And as far as I understand it, these allegations are all from a variety of individuals who say that, or were claiming that they had been essentially sexually assaulted, or in some cases had been very drunk and sort of woken up to find Kevin Spacey allegedly performing a sexual act on them. And I remember when a few months ago now, Kevin Spacey had his first hearing at the magistrates court here, and it was decided that the case was clearly rightly decided that the case was so serious that it couldn't stay at the magistrates court. It would have to go up to a Crown Court for a trial by jury. There was actually some comment about the fact that the judge had allowed Spacey to remain on bail and go back to America, given the gravity of the allegations. And Spacey, in all fairness to him, insisted he had every intention of coming back to London when he was supposed to and clearing his name, which indeed he has actually done. And I think for essentially the past month, this trial has been going on at Southwark Crown Court. The jury have heard at length from each of these accusers, all of whom, I will add, remain anonymous under English law. They, excuse me, complainants in sexual cases cannot be identified unless they personally waive their anonymity. So all of these accusers, as it stands, remain anonymous. The jury have heard all the evidence. They've heard from Kevin Spacey about all of these accusations, and they found him not guilty of every single one of the charges.
Were these, I'm curious, were these criminal charges or civil charges against him?
These were criminal charges.
So is it like in the States where when it's a criminal charge, it's a higher standard of evidence?
Yes, the standard proof for criminal charges here, as in the States, is that the jury have to be sure beyond reasonable doubt.
Okay, interesting. So what do you guys think about what this, I mean, for 6 years, this man has been basically blacklisted and shunned by the entertainment industry, by the kind of the world as a whole. And now, to the points before, this is one of many cases, but it is it's kind of a groundbreaking verdict. But whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? Are we going toward a negative trend? Has this always been the trend, or is this something that the monster of the Me Too movement has created?
Well, the fact that he's been repeatedly found not guilty doesn't necessarily mean that he's innocent. We may never know for sure. My sense here is that he will very likely never work again, neither in Hollywood nor anywhere else in the industry. Given the current atmosphere in the industry, the hostility directed towards him and people like him who've been accused of these kinds of activities. Ideally, the decision whether Kevin Spacey should work on a movie or in television should be up to individual studios or directors, whether or not they want to work with him, colleagues, fellow actors, whether they want to collaborate with him. But I think the atmosphere is such that his reputation has become absolutely toxic. And there's actually a related case that happened. It actually came out around the same time as the Kevin Spacey case. I always associate these two cases because in the wake of the Me Too movement, these were among the few cases where the accusers were actually male. The other case I'm thinking of is James Levine. For those in the audience not familiar with James Levine, he was the music director of the Metropolitan Opera for decades. I mean, pretty much for half a century. I mean, since the 80s, he was the music director at the Met. And he was recently accused by men who are now adults, now older adults. The actual accusations concerned incidents that had happened in the 70s when these men were in their mid-teens, I think mid to late teens. They claimed that Levine had taken advantage of them, sexually abused them, and they were now coming forward as adults many, many decades later. Why the case was interesting is that there were strong suggestions that the Metropolitan Opera actually knew about these incidents or were aware of some of the allegations against Levine, but had kept it quiet as long as they possibly could. Obviously, in the wake of the Me Too movement, it was no longer possible to keep these allegations quiet. But as soon as this came out publicly in the media, the Met absolutely broke all ties with James Levine. They completely distanced. He's now deceased. He died a couple of years ago. His health had been declining for some time. So, but even if he hadn't died, I don't think there would have been any chance of any rehabilitation, just because of the extreme prejudice and hostility. Even though I don't think he was ever actually charged with a crime or convicted of a crime. the tables have turned, and people simply aren't, even if there's an accusation about some kind of wrongdoing, people simply aren't tolerating it. They're not working with anyone who has been accused of these kinds of activities.
Megan, what do you think about all this? Have you been following the case?
I haven't. I'm sorry. I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know anything about it.
Okay,
Well,
but
just-
Megan, you did mention in an email you've been following a somewhat related case. It's not exactly sexual misconduct, but you mentioned that you've been following the Joss Whedon case and some of the accusations of him bullying the actors that he's been working with and otherwise mistreating them, being rude to them. Perhaps tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's kind of an interesting, it sheds another interesting light on this case.
Sure. So, when I heard about this, it was because for those who aren't familiar, Joss Whedon is the writer, director, creator of a number of movies and TV shows. He's probably best known for the first two Avengers movies. But he got a cult following starting in the late 90s with the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And
One of my favorite shows in the whole wide world.
yeah, to be honest, I don't think I would have gotten through graduate school without Buffy. I'd never seen the show when it was live. I actually had an Objectivist friend introduce me to it, and it was really profound. It was
Amazing
really,
show. I mean, obviously, I was growing up at the same time when it first came on over here. So,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. No, it's I'll just share one moment to explain why I think the show, it deserves a lot of love. There's a moment at the end of season 2 where Buffy's had a really bad day. That is, one of her friends has been killed. She's been expelled from school. Her mom has kicked her out of her home, and her boyfriend's been possessed by a demon who is now attacking her and trying to kill her. And if he succeeds, the world will be destroyed. At one point, so they're sword fighting, and he disarms her.
I was in tears watching this scene. I'll admit it. Yeah, I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
Slight spoiler alert. He disarms her. Her back is literally against the wall. He says, "You have no friends, no weapons, no hope. Take all that away, and what's left?" And at that moment, he brings, and Buffy kind of closes her eyes and cringes against the wall. He brings down the sword. She smacks it between her hands and says, "There's me." And the reason that moment is so profound for me is because that is what I want for myself and my daughter and everyone I've ever cared about, to feel that if there is nothing else, having yourself is enough. And it's enough to save the world. So you can imagine my distress when I heard one of the actresses, Charisma Carpenter, talk about how Joss Whedon had called her fat when she was pregnant. You know, he acted as if she needed permission to start a family just because she worked for him, that he was, you know, that he was verbally abusive to her, to other cast, other crew. And at first, I had hoped that this was just some horrible misunderstanding. You know, I wasn't there, so I wasn't going to tell her that she was wrong, but I really hoped that this was just some big mistake and nobody was wrong. You know what I mean? Ray Fisher had come out and said that he was racist. A lot of other people in Whedon's orbit talked about just the horrible ways he treated people. So one young woman, wasn't an actress, I think she was a writer of some sort, said that her worst fear was to be broken up with on her birthday. And then Joss Whedon, who had been dating her on the side, I don't know if he was married at the time or not, did exactly that. There was one woman who he dated who was a virgin. He took her virginity and then immediately broke up with her. It's just really slimeball accusations.
And And Sarah Michelle Gellar, the actual star of Buffy, came out in full support for Charisma Carpenter, as well.
Right. Yeah. James Marsters talked about how at one point Whedon assaulted him because he was so popular with the fans. He was the actor who played Spike. He was originally scheduled to do a few episodes and then be killed off. And the audience responded to him so much that he ended up staying through the entire season. And early on, Whedon was just upset that like the audience had usurped his creative vision or something. He was like, "You're dead, kid," and pushed, Marsters up against the wall. Yeah, just a lot of really slimeball things coming from a lot of people. And what really struck me about Whedon's response, because 2 years late, I think it was 2 years later, he did an interview for Vulture, kind of trying to clear his name. And he talked about, he had an upset childhood. I think at the time that Charisma Carpenter, let me back up. At the time Charisma Carpenter had made these allegations publicly, Whedon had said stuff like, "Well, she sometimes had trouble with her lines, but she was a good actor." I'm paraphrasing. He talked about how Ray Fisher was a bad actor in both senses of the words. And the reason I bring this up is because this is something I haven't heard anyone comment on, is how people with narcissistic personality disorder, and again, I am not a psychologist, so take this for what it's worth. What I've read is that they do DARVO, right? They deny, they accuse, they try to reverse victim and offender. So he'll say stuff like, Charisma Carpenter couldn't remember her lines, therefore she, paraphrasing, therefore she deserved it. Ray Fisher is a bad actor, therefore he deserved it. When I read that was his response to some accusations of just unacceptable behavior, I was pretty convinced that he'd done single thing people had said he'd done. I'm curious if you guys want to add to that or detract from it.
Well, it's interesting, and I want to try to parallel this a bit with the Kevin Spacey case, because this, when I look at the Kevin Spacey case, I can kind of take it or leave it, because I don't care about him that much as a human being, or as an artistic contributor to the world. What I care about is a person who is kind of convicted in the public eye, and doesn't is unfairly punished. And I'm not saying that that's happened to either Spacey or Joss Whedon. I do care a great amount for people that, I feel like one of the last bastions of constitution that we have left in the United States, at least, is our legal system, is the reverent presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And I take that very, very seriously. But then at the same time, there is such a thing as moral judgment, right? Rather than just, convicting somebody on a legal basis. And when I found out about Kevin Spacey, I was kind of like, nah, that tracks. I just, that does seem to track. He's self, he admitted himself that, he's, maybe not in his own words did he say that he was a sexual deviant or whatever, however people want to take that definition, but that he was, very much into sex with lots of people. And I think that there were also some accusations of young people as well, younger. I'm not sure if they were minors that the accusations stood on, but then you take somebody like Joss Whedon, who for all intents and purposes is my absolute hero. I I mean, I'm a screenwriter myself, and when I was just getting started in when I was just getting started in writing, I started as a prose writer. I was laid up with multiple knee surgeries, and I would just watch Buffy over and over in the DVDs, and I was the fool that would watch the writer commentary, and that would just sit there and read the script on the TV and page by it and page by it. And one of the most so I would listen to people like Marty Knox and the rest of Tim Minear, who, you know, they would say, any line that you ever thought was the most brilliant line in Buffy, Joss wrote it. Any line that's brilliant, he wrote it. Because they all wrote the scripts together, right? And sometimes he would, but he would come in and he would write that, you know, get that 1 or 2 lines in that was like, if we're fans of Buffy, the yellow crayon scene with when Willow's about to destroy the world, and Xander stops her basically with love. But, you know, brings her back to this moment in kindergarten with the yellow crayon, and, you know, everybody's just in tears with it. So it was, when I say that I was heartbroken when I discovered the accusations against Joss, I'm not being dramatic about it. I was literally heartbroken, and I went through the same sort of journey that Megan did. Who we lost again, but I'm sure she'll be back. I went through that same sort of journey of I don't want it to be true, and you know, and he should be, you know. I remember he was producing The Nevers at this time when the news of this broke, which is an HBO series, and I did, and then I read that same article, the one that Megan was talking about in Vulture, and I kind of came to that, you know, to the same conclusion that, you know, this man, you know, really, he was not like the greatest person on set. He was actually quite terrifying to people. But then, you know, how do we react to that as consumers of entertainment, right? If we're looking at a Kevin Spacey and just, if we're judging him based on his acting, or if we're judging Joss based on his writing, they're excellent at what they do. How should we be responding to this as objectivists? Should we be canceling them in our own moral code? What do you guys think?
For me, the answer to that is very simple. I'm very good at separating an artist's creative work from his personal life. Just to take one example, I just did an Ocon talk on Richard Wagner, very great poet, composer, musician, who was a racist. He was an anti-Semite, which is terrible, appalling, but I can still enjoy his work. I can still enjoy his music in spite of that. Now, one of the things that, getting back to Joss Whedon, one of the things that really irritates me about his particular case is it's important to make a distinction in an artist, particularly with creative artists who are in some sort of a position of power or position of authority. I'm thinking of a stage director, film director, orchestra conductor. Such people often tend to be very demanding of themselves and of others. They tend to be difficult to work with. Often they can be, you know, very irritable, very, very angry when they don't get their way. And there is a certain sense where that can be understandable as long as you keep the personal and the professional separate. If you have, for example, a director or a conductor who's very demanding in a rehearsal or on stage or whatever, but as long as in their private life they maintain the highest standards of conduct towards other people, I can understand that. What really bothers me about Joss Whedon is that he was personally nasty to these people in his relationships outside of the work situation. Just to tie this into something in my own experience, so I was an orchestra conductor for about a decade. I have to admit, on the podium, I was pretty brutal. I knew exactly what I wanted, and if I didn't get it, you know, there were times when I raised my voice or used coarse language or whatever, but it was never personal. Off the podium, I was a completely different character. You could approach me, you could talk about anything. That was completely separate. So it's a matter of keeping the personal and the professional separate and maintaining the highest possible standards in one's personal conduct. If that's the case, then yeah, because many great conductors, many great film directors were tyrants in the way they dealt with the people they worked with. I know Kubrick had a reputation for that. James Cameron is another example. There have been many actors. I've heard that there are many actors who said that they would refuse to work with Cameron again because of the way he treated them, because of his manner towards people that he worked with.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. You can appreciate an artist for their you can appreciate an artist for their art, and also separate that from the kind of person that they are. I think Wagner is actually a really good example of being an absolutely hideous person. He would he would conduct Mendelssohn in white gloves and then take the gloves off and spit on them and throw them on the ground, because Mendelssohn was Jewish. But yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. Matthew, did you have any comments on this?
Well, I think obviously sort of coming at this from a lawyer perspective, if I can put it in that way. Kevin Spacey is innocent until proven guilty. He has not been proven guilty. Why should he not be able to just resume his career?
Yeah, again, without knowing anything about the case, it may be that it's beyond the statute of limitation, or there's not physical evidence. You know, let me preface by saying that I am a deeply flawed human being. There may be people watching who are like, you're really criticizing Joss Whedon. So I'd like to think that no one's ever been intimidated working with me. But at the same time, you know, I have some knowledge of what it's like when someone does something deplorable to you and nobody cares, and they continue to enable these people. And if indeed that's the case with Kevin Spacey, and I do not know, you know, these victims may not be able to get justice again due to a statute of limitation, which I think should exist, due to a need for physical evidence, which I think should exist. And just to have someone else out there say, I don't think you're lying, you know, and what you describe is not okay. I think that's valuable. I think that's right. There should be a separation between what is illegal and immoral. I mean, there's definitely overlap. And I think it's okay for people to make moral judgment. And frankly, I wish more people did. And I say that again, acknowledging that I am a deeply flawed human being.
Well, and you make a really good point, Megan, in that separation, right, between the moral and the legal judgment. We should all be judging, right? All of us. That is, we make judgments every day about everything all the time, and many of them are moral judgments. It does not mean that the conclusion that we come to at a particular moment is the final conclusion. I think we should always be judging, but we should always be open to additional evidence that could change our minds about it. What I don't like about sort of today's cancel culture is the rush to judging and the lack of being open to any additional evidence. I think that in a case like Kevin Spacey and in a case like Joss Whedon, I will also throw in there, what's his name from The Flash, Ezra Miller. If anybody is familiar with him in the DC world, who has reportedly, you know, had some very bad behavior. In fact, my daughter almost refused to go see the new Flash with me because of what a hideous person she felt that he was. And then I regretted watching the movie because he's really not a great lead actor. He's way better as a sidekick. But anyhow, people like that, there is a lot of information available to go and research these the accusations on these people, right? You had Charisma Carpenter coming out with all the texts, and then Sarah Michelle Gellar, who has a consummate professional, actually came out and cited on Charisma's side. And there were enough people that came out with their own personal stories. And then, of course, Whedon himself, in his own admission, or in what Megan was talking about, his deflection is a kind of an abusive deflection, is telltale signs for victims or for abused victims that yeah, something doesn't smell right with that. So, but there's a difference between these people that I'm talking about. You can go and watch, videos of Ezra Miller just acting like a terrible person. And then other people who are just getting canceled for, something that they said in college, 20 years ago. And they've grown as individuals, but the world at large has just, thrown them down the drain. But I do think it is very important. It's an objectivist tenet is to judge. We should judge. We should judge morally. We should allow the courts to judge legally, but we should also be open to new evidence that comes in, and be willing to reverse judgments. Be willing to say, you know what, I thought this guy was a jerk or whatever, and evidence came out and I was wrong about it. But so we are at the top of the hour, folks. We got through 2 topics today. And I am just going to check to see if we've got some super chats that I've missed. Mary Aline for $3.99 is sending us a cup of coffee. Thank you. Cheers, Mary Aline. Although it's evening time, so Matthew's enjoying his lovely cocktail. Marilyn, again, as a member, Steve Jobs was brutal, but many people who worked for him said he brought out their absolute best. It's complicated. Yes, it's complicated. Look at the movie Whiplash. And Leonard Peikoff's absolute favorite movie in the whole world. And J.K. Simmons was an absolute tyrant to his young student, to what I thought was a fairly, abusive line. But yeah, it is complicated. People kind of like the mad geniuses, although I still am like on the side of, do you really have to be such a dick? Like, is that really necessary? Yeah, you get people to give you their best performance without being a dick? Are these the only 2 options?
You should see some of the orchestras I've worked with.
Years and years ago, when I was first starting out in the legal profession, my first boss was very, very, how do I put it, temperamental, shall we say. And we would quite often end up just straight up arguing about something or other in the office. But, it never went too far. We'd always make a point of going down the pub in the evening and just smoothing things over. And looking back, I think he probably actually genuinely was just trying to get the best out of me. And I think he actually did give me very good training with hindsight. And I now would say although I've moved on, I'm in a different law firm now. I actually do regard him as a friend now.
Here. Some of the best teachers I've had were the ones who kicked my ass. And I'm grateful for them now.
Yeah, I will agree with that. As well. Though I have had other teachers that were absolutely wonderful and inspired me. One of my teacher in college inspired me to become a writer. And without being mean. So I think it can go both ways. Folks, this has been wonderful. I've got a couple of announcements on upcoming shows, which I just lost in my in my chat box. Okay, upcoming shows at 10 o'clock p.m. UK time, Life on Earth with Robert Nazir. Do not miss that. That's again 10 o'clock UK time. And tomorrow, special announcement, folks, TV Talk is back with Mark Pellegrino, Jennifer Buoni, and myself. We are going to be talking about True Detective Season 1. We're all very excited to talk about it with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. We will be starting tomorrow at 2:15 Pacific time, which is 10:15 UK time, because Mark has to go to jujitsu, and we don't want Mark to not get his jits in. So, folks, this has been great. This has been wonderful. Big round of applause for Megan and Matthew. I think this is your first time. Your collective virgins have been de-virginized. And we will catch our next shows, catch our upcoming shows, and stay tuned for Robert Nazir and then TV Talk on us tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.